The fluorescent lights of the Joint Logistics Hub at FOB Erebus hummed a flat, indifferent note, a sound that grated on Alara Vance's teeth. It was a tired sound, the hum of overworked ballasts and deferred maintenance. She stood near the entrance, a ghost in sterile tan fatigues with no name tape, no rank, no flag on her shoulder. To the casual observer, she was a contractor, a civilian analyst, or perhaps just profoundly lost. This anonymity was a tool as essential to her work as the diagnostic suite on her datapad. Colonel Madsen did not do casual observation. He strode through the cavernous warehouse like a touring monarch, his polished boot heels clicking in aggressive rhythm on the stained concrete. He was flanked by a nervous young Lieutenant, Davies, whose notepad was already open, and a stolid Master Sergeant, Reyes, whose face was a study in impassive neutrality. Madsen's eyes swept past Vance, registered her lack of insignia, and dismissed her in a single, fluid motion. He stopped before Reyes, his hands clasped behind his back, radiating an aura of absolute command. Master Sergeant, your hub's efficiency is up 7% this quarter. Commendable, Madsen announced, his voice booming with the artificial resonance of a man used to being the loudest in any room. We're moving metal, sir, Reyes said, his tone perfectly level. Indeed, that's what I'll be reporting to CENTCOM. We are a well-oiled machine here at Erebus. The tip of the spear, he finally deigned to acknowledge Vance, gesturing vaguely in her direction with his chin. And this is? Ma'am, this is Colonel Madsen, the base commander, Reyes said, his gaze briefly meeting Vance's. He saw nothing but calm attention. Sir, this is the analyst from Logistics Command I mentioned. She's here for the system integration audit. Madsen offered a tight, dismissive smile. Ah yes, the bean counter. Welcome to the front lines of efficiency. Try not to get in the way of the real work. He winked at Lieutenant Davies, who produced a thin, appreciative chuckle. We're running Operation Vigilance in 48 hours. Biggest push of the quarter. My metrics need to stay green. Vance simply nodded, her expression unreadable. Her silence seemed to irritate the colonel more than any argument would have. He wanted deference or debate. She offered only placid observation. Well, carry on, he barked, turning his back on her. Reyes, the tour. Show her the numbers. She'll see Erebus is the model of modern military logistics. With another sharp click of his heels, the colonel and his acolyte were gone, leaving Vance in the humming, dusty air with Master Sergeant Reyes. The NCO's shoulders relaxed by a millimeter, the only sign of the tension he'd been holding. Analyst, he said, the word a statement, not a question. That's the title on the orders, Vance replied, her voice quiet, measured. It was a voice that didn't waste air. Reyes grunted. He likes his metrics green, keeps the generals happy, keeps his star polished. He gestured with a thick, calloused hand. The hub. What do you need to see? Everything, she said. Let's start with the heavy automated loaders. She spent the next several hours in methodical silence, a shadow trailing Reyes through the controlled chaos of the warehouse. She didn't just look at the gleaming readiness charts displayed on oversized monitors. She watched the machines themselves. She saw a HAL-5 unit, one of the massive robotic arms that shifted tons of cargo, stutter for a microsecond at the apex of its lift, a hydraulic tremor almost too small to notice. Reyes saw her pause, her head cocked. Something wrong? He asked. What's the maintenance schedule on the primary actuators for these units? She asked, her eyes still fixed on the machine. Bi-weekly diagnostics, full service quarterly. It's all in the system. Everything's green. Pull up the last quarterly report for Unit 5, she requested, not looking at him. Reyes tapped on his own datapad. After a moment, he grunted again. Here. Signed off by the civilian tech team 2 weeks ago. All checks passed. Vance finally looked away from the machine and at his screen. Her eyes scanned the digital form. The torque values for the main lift gimbal are identical to the previous quarter's report, to 3 decimal places. Reyes frowned, leaning closer to his screen. So, consistent performance. Or a consistent cut and paste, Vance countered softly. A machine part under this much stress doesn't produce identical wear metrics over 3 months of heavy use. It's statistically impossible. A flicker of understanding, quickly suppressed, crossed the Master Sergeant's face. He knew she was right. He'd had his own suspicions about the contractors, but he was a soldier, not an engineer. His job was to move the freight and trust the systems the colonel championed. "I'll make a note," he said, his voice carefully neutral. They moved on. Vance pointed out a pallet of sensitive electronics stored too close to the unshielded power conduits for the main conveyor, a violation of Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the Material Handling Regulations. She noted 3 stacks of AMRAAM missile containers whose humidity sensors were blinking amber, indicating the desiccant was failing, a silent countdown to corrosion. Each time, Reyes would check his datapad and find a green icon, a perfect report that contradicted the physical reality before them. The system, the one Colonel Madsen was so proud of, was lying. It was a beautiful, efficient, green-lit fiction. Vance wasn't just looking at equipment. She was reading the story of the base. A story of pressure from the top, of corners being cut to meet impossible operational tempos. A story of young soldiers and overworked contractors taking the path of least resistance, pencil-whipping inspections to avoid the wrath of a commander who valued the appearance of readiness over readiness itself. Master Sergeant Reyes saw it too. He saw it in the way Vance moved, the quiet confidence with which she diagnosed failures, the institutional knowledge she carried so lightly. This was no ordinary analyst. They ended the tour at the Central Control Nexus, a glassed-in room overlooking the entire hub. The air was cool, filled with the quiet clicks of keyboards and the low murmur of radio traffic. "Any other questions?" Reyes asked, his tone having shifted from wary professionalism to something approaching genuine curiosity. Vance gestured to the main operations board, a dizzying array of data streams showing cargo movements across the entire theater of operations. Operation Vigilance. The objective is Strong Point Kestrel. Yes, they're running low on everything. Water, ammo, medical. This push is critical. The forecast shows a significant weather event developing over the Zagros Mountains. A haboob. Right along the flight path. Reyes's expression tightened. The colonel is aware. He says it's a manageable risk. The window is closing, and Kestrel can't wait. Risk is a function of variables, Vance said, her gaze distant, as if she were calculating complex trajectories in her head. And you have too many unacknowledged variables in this building alone. The foundation of this entire operation is unstable. Before Reyes could respond, the door hissed open and Lieutenant Davies entered, carrying a sheaf of printouts. He beamed, his youthful face alight with pride. "Master Sergeant, the final readiness reports for vigilance. We're at 99.7% operational readiness. A new record for the hub. The colonel will be very pleased." He handed a copy to Reyes, then, as an afterthought, offered one to the silent woman beside him. "For your audit," he said with a touch of condescension. Vance took the papers. She didn't look at the bold, green numbers at the top. Her eyes went straight to the appendices, to the raw data streams from the very machines she had just inspected. The numbers were perfect, flawless. A fiction, printed and bound. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she said, her voice betraying nothing. "This is very clean." Davies puffed up his chest, missing the subtle irony. "We run a tight ship." Vance watched him leave, her gaze unblinking. The hum of the overworked lights seemed to grow louder, a harbinger of the failure that was being so meticulously documented, certified, and approved. The foundation wasn't just unstable. It was beginning to crumble. The next morning, the JOC was a hive of self-congratulatory energy. Colonel Madsen stood before the main holotable, a maestro conducting his symphony of logistics. The data streams for Operation Vigilance flowed in vibrant greens and blues across the display. "Launch sequence initiated," a controller announced. "First C-17, callsign Raptor 1, is on the tarmac. Final loading in progress." Madsen nodded, a satisfied smile on his face. He caught Vance's eye where she stood in the back of the room, an obligatory observer. He gave her a pointed look, as if to say, "This is how it's done." Vance was not watching the holotable. She was watching a small, secondary monitor displaying atmospheric conditions. The weather system over the mountains was deepening from yellow to a bruised orange. The wind speed predictions were climbing. The pre-flight briefing had been a masterclass in confirmation bias. The weather officer, a young captain, had presented the data with a nervous tremor, emphasizing the operational window before the storm's predicted peak. Madsen had cut him off, clapping him on the shoulder. "Excellent work, Captain. You found us the gap. We thread the needle. Execute." The unspoken message was clear. "Give me the answer I want." Now, as the final pallets were being loaded, Vance's datapad chimed with a low-priority alert she had set the night before. Unit 5.
How?
Vibration sensor threshold exceeded. Event 437 Zulu. The tremor she had noticed, the one dismissed as a statistical anomaly. It was happening again under the full weight of critical cargo. She cross-referenced the alert with the loading manifest for Raptor 7, the fourth plane in the sequence. It was being loaded with the spare turbine assembly for Strongpoint Kestrel's generators, a dense, awkwardly balanced piece of equipment weighing several tons. A predictable failure point meeting a predictable stressor. She approached Master Sergeant Reyes, who was monitoring the ground crew communications. "Master Sergeant," she said, her voice low, "I need you to flag the loadmaster on Raptor 7. Have him manually inspect the anchor locks on pallet 4B. Reyes looked from her intense expression to the clock. "Ma'am, they're 30 seconds from sealing the ramp. The colonel will have my hide if I delay the launch." "A delay is better than a disaster," she replied, her voice flat and cold. "The locks on that pallet were likely installed with a pneumatic wrench whose torque calibration has drifted. The vibration from the HAL 5 unit could have exacerbated it. They won't hold in severe turbulence." Reyes hesitated. He was caught between the incontrovertible confidence of this woman and the volcanic certainty of his commander. His radio crackled. "Raptor 7 is green. Ramp is coming up." It was too late. "All birds are green for takeoff," Lieutenant Davies announced, his voice filled with a reverence usually reserved for religious ceremonies. "On the colonel's mark." Madsen raised his hand dramatically. "Execute." On the main screen, the icons for the 4 heavy transport planes began to move, taxiing in perfect formation toward the runway. Vance watched them go, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She had provided the warning. The system, in its relentless pursuit of perfect metrics, had refused to listen. For the first hour, the operation was flawless. The 4 icons tracked steadily across the map, a testament to Madsen's well-oiled machine. The colonel was expansive, walking the floor of the JOC, joking with the controllers. He was already composing the after-action report in his head, a glowing testament to his own leadership. Then the first report came in. "Erebus Command, this is Raptor 1. We're hitting the leading edge of the front. Turbulence is significant. Stronger than forecasted." Madsen waved a dismissive hand. "They're professionals. They can handle a little chop." But the reports grew more urgent. The voice of the pilot from Raptor 3 was tight with strain. "Command, we're getting extreme wind shear. Visibility is nil. Requesting permission to alter course to find a smoother altitude." "Negative, Raptor 3. Madsen snapped into the mic, his good humor evaporating. "Maintain course and speed. You break formation, you compromise the entire mission timeline." Vance watched the atmospheric display. The orange had bled into a deep, angry red. The haboob had accelerated, its leading edge a wall of sand and fury. They weren't threading a needle. They were flying directly into a hurricane of dust. And then the call came that she had been expecting. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Raptor 7. We have a severe load shift. Repeat, a severe load shift. We are in an uncontrolled oscillation, fighting for control." The calm professionalism of the JOC shattered. Controllers shouted status requests into their headsets. Lieutenant Davies stood, his face ashen, his hands trembling. Colonel Madsen grabbed the command microphone, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. Raptor 7, specify. What happened? The aft cargo broke loose. Pallet 4B. Oh God. It's sliding. We're going into a dive. The transmission was cut off by a burst of static and the terrifying shriek of stressed metal. On the main screen, the icon for Raptor 7 began to wobble erratically, its altitude numbers plummeting in a terrifying red cascade. Chaos erupted. Madsen was yelling, but his orders were contradictory and useless. Get me a damage report. What are the standard procedures for a load shift? Someone get me the manual. Davies, why didn't the loadmaster catch this? He was a man drowning in the failure of his own perfect system, and his only instinct was to find someone to blame. Davies was frozen, staring at the failing icon, his mind blank with panic. The other controllers were locked in a feedback loop of confusion, their screens filled with cascading error messages as Raptor 7's data link began to fail. The entire system, built on the assumption of success, had no coherent response to a catastrophic failure. Through it all, Vance remained perfectly still. She had watched the predictable outcome unfold, and now the time for observation was over. She moved from her position at the back of the room with a quiet, deliberate purpose that cut through the noise and panic. People unconsciously stepped aside, clearing a path for her as if sensing a shift in the center of gravity. She didn't go to the command console. She didn't look at the main screen. She walked to a secondary engineering terminal in the corner, one that had been dark a moment before. Her fingers moved across the keyboard in a blur of expert motion, typing lines of code, overriding administrative lockouts. She wasn't using the polished graphical interface. She was in the machine's digital guts. The screen filled with raw data, telemetry strings, sensor feeds, diagnostic logs. It was a meaningless waterfall of characters to everyone else in the room. To her, it was a language she understood better than English. Get me a direct link to Raptor 7's cockpit voice recorder feed. Patch it to the station only, she said, her voice calm but carrying an authority that made the nearest comms tech react instinctively, his hands flying to his console without waiting for the colonel's permission. Madsen, finally noticing the usurper, spun around. What in God's name do you think you're doing? He bellowed. Vance ignored him. A tinny, static-laced voice filled her headset. It was the co-pilot of Raptor 7. Can't stabilize. The autopilot is shot. The whole tail is fishtailing. Vance's fingers flew across the keyboard again. She was building a new flight model, one based not on the corrupted data from the cargo master system, but on the raw inputs from the plane's gyroscopes and stress gauges. She was mentally reconstructing the state of the aircraft, ton by ton, rivet by rivet. Master Sergeant Reyes, she called out, her eyes never leaving the screen. Get the chief of the maintenance depot on the line. I need the exact weight to the gram of the M17 turbine assembly, including the shipping cradle. Reyes was already moving, his face set with a grim purpose. He had chosen his side. He recognized true leadership when he saw it, and it was not coming from the red-faced colonel who was still sputtering in indignation. Raptor 7, this is Erebus Logistics, Vance said into her microphone, her voice a blade of pure calm in the storm of panic. It wasn't a question of authority. It was a statement of fact. I need you to describe the oscillation. Is it a port starboard yaw or a vertical bucking? There was a moment of confused silence from the cockpit. Who is this? Where's the colonel? The colonel is currently occupied. Yaw or bucking? She repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. Yaw, the pilot grunted, the strain evident in his voice. A violent yaw to starboard every time we try to climb. Copy that, Vance said. The turbine cradle has shifted and is pinned against the starboard fuselage. Its center of gravity is now 6 meters aft and 2 meters starboard of where it should be. The flight computer can't compensate because it thinks the load is secure. Her voice was devoid of emotion, a clinical diagnosis of a dying patient. She began to issue instructions. I need you to disengage the fly-by-wire system's primary stability augmentation. Switch to direct law. It will be like flying a brick, but you'll have control. Then, I need you to prepare to jettison cargo. Jettison? The pilot yelled. Command just told us to maintain course. The old command is no longer relevant, Vance stated coldly. Your new objective is survival. The cargo you need to jettison is Pallet 3A, 5C, and 5D. They are medical supplies and rations. It will shift the center of gravity forward and to port just enough to counteract the turbine. Do you understand? She was not asking. She was telling him the only sequence of actions that would save his aircraft and his crew. She had calculated it in seconds, running thousands of simulations in her head, drawing on a depth of knowledge that seemed inhuman. In the JOC, everyone had stopped. The shouting was gone. The panic was replaced by a stunned silence as they watched this unknown woman, this civilian analyst, single-handedly command a life-or-death crisis with chilling precision. She was a still point in a turning world, her focus absolute, her authority undeniable. She wasn't leading through rank or volume, but through sheer, overwhelming competence. The machine was broken, and the architect had arrived to fix it. Colonel Madsen watched, his face a thunderous mask of fury and humiliation. His entire command, his meticulously constructed world of green metrics and absolute authority, had been dismantled in less than 5 minutes by a quiet woman at a backroom terminal. He had lost control of the room, of the mission, of his own narrative. His fists were clenched, the knuckles white. He strode across the JOC, the sound of his boots unnaturally loud in the silent room. He stopped directly behind Vance, looming over her. She didn't flinch, didn't even seem to register his presence. Her attention locked on the data stream and the voice in her ear. I am giving you a direct order, Madsen snarled, his voice low and shaking with rage. Step away from that console. You are interfering with a command situation. You are a civilian. You have no authority here. Vance held up one finger, a universal sign for wait a moment, as she listened intently to her headset. Negative Raptor 7. Do not jettison the main water purification unit. Its mass is critical to the balance. Jettison the secondary filters only. Acknowledge. She waited for the pilot's strained confirmation before she finally swiveled in her chair, her movement slow and deliberate, to face the colonel. Her eyes were calm, but they held a hardness that made Madsen take an involuntary step back. It was the look of someone who had seen real crises, real failures, and had no time for manufactured outrage. Colonel, she said, her voice still quiet but now laced with ice. Your cargo master system is experiencing recursive data decay because you've bypassed the mandatory quarterly diagnostics for the last 3 cycles to keep your operational tempo artificially high. The load shift on Raptor 7 wasn't a random accident. It was the number 4 pallet, the one with the spare turbine assembly. Its anchor locks were flagged for replacement 200 operational hours ago in the maintenance logs you chose to ignore. You are not flying in a storm, sir. You are flying with a predictable, systemic failure of your own making. Every word was a precision strike. She hadn't raised her voice, but she had systematically vivisected his command in front of his entire staff. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint crackle of radio static. Madsen's face went from red to a sickly white. He turned to a stunned Lieutenant Davies. Is this true? He demanded, his voice a desperate rasp. Davies could only stare, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked at the perfect reports he had so proudly compiled, and then at the unfolding disaster on the main screen. The lie was too big to sustain. He gave a slight, terrified nod. The confirmation seemed to break something in Madsen. His fury, stripped of its righteous indignation, curdled into pure, sputtering rage. This woman hadn't just disobeyed him. She had exposed him. She had revealed that his well-oiled machine was a hollow shell, and he was nothing more than its arrogant, ignorant operator. He fell back on the last bastion of a failed leader, the raw, naked assertion of rank. I don't care what you think you know, he hissed, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. "I am the commander of this installation. I need your name. And your rank," he added the last part with a contemptuous sneer, a final, pathetic attempt to put her back in her place. He expected her to be a GS-12, maybe a GS-13. A civilian he could have stripped of her credentials and thrown off his base before the sun went down. Vance simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to answer. Master Sergeant Reyes, who had been standing by his own console, quietly accessing the personnel database, spoke into the void. His voice was steady, respectful, and carried the finality of a judge reading a verdict. "Sir," he began, and every head in the room turned toward him. "Her name is Vance. Alara Vance." Reyes paused, letting the name hang in the air for a beat before delivering the final blow. "She's Chief Warrant Officer 5 Vance. From Forces Command." He took a slow breath. "Sir, she's the senior logistics architect for the entire theater. She designed the cargo master system. She wrote the manual." As if on cue, the secondary terminal Vance was using Flash to system query response she had initiated minutes earlier to gain full administrative control. It was projected onto the main screen for all to see, a simple text box that overrode the frantic red warnings. At the bottom, in crisp, block letters that glowed in the dim light of the JOC, was her authentication signature. User Auth. Vance, E. CW5. U.S. Army. SysArch. CLR. TS/Psi. The 3 letters and a number, CW5, landed in the room with the force of a physical explosion. Chief Warrant Officer 5. The quiet professionals. The technical masters. A rank so rare and respected that even 4-star generals typically address them as chief. They were living legends, the keepers of institutional knowledge, accountable not to the whims of individual commanders, but to the integrity of the Army systems themselves.
Colonel Matson froze.
His sneer slackened, his jaw going limp. The color drained completely from his face, leaving a pallid, waxy sheen under the harsh JOC lighting. He stared at the screen, then at the woman in the chair, and finally at the gleaming silver eagle on his own collar, which suddenly seemed like a cheap tin toy. He had not just challenged a subordinate. He had not just berated a civilian contractor. He had, in a fit of pique, attempted to humiliate one of the most senior and respected technical experts in the entire United States Army. He had challenged the architect of the system on her own creation. The silence that followed was not just quiet. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the crushing weight of his career-ending blunder. He was a hollow man exposed to his core. The shift in the JOC was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if the laws of physics had been reasserted. The controllers, who had been frozen in indecision, now turned to Vance, awaiting her commands. The frantic energy was replaced by a quiet, focused intensity. The center of authority had officially and irrevocably moved from the colonel's command podium to the small, unassuming chair in the corner. Matson simply stepped back. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He retreated to the edge of the room, a ghost at his own command, watching the woman he had dismissed save the lives he had endangered. Vance paid him no mind. Her world had narrowed to the data on her screen and the voices of the aircrew. "Raptor 7, your yaw should be dampening now," she said, her voice a steady anchor. "The jettison was successful. You're still heavy, but you're balanced. Now, let's talk about getting you home." For the next hour, she was magnificent. She became the central node for the entire recovery operation. She didn't just direct Raptor 7. She rerouted the other 3 aircraft, guiding them through a narrow, treacherous corridor in the storm she had identified from raw satellite data, a path the automated weather models had missed. She coordinated with air traffic control from 2 different sectors, overriding their standard protocols with her authority. She tasked a drone squadron from a nearby base to launch with emergency supplies for Strongpoint Kestrel, calculating a low-altitude flight path that would keep them under the worst of the haboob. She was not just managing a crisis. She was conducting a symphony of complex, interlocking systems, playing them with the innate, effortless mastery of a virtuoso. Lieutenant Davies watched, his earlier arrogance replaced by a profound, almost fearful awe. He was witnessing a level of competence he hadn't known was possible. This was the reality behind the metrics, the living embodiment of the standards he had only ever seen as checkboxes on a form. Slowly, order was restored. Raptor 7, crippled but stable, was guided to an emergency landing at a forward airstrip. The other 3 C-17s made it through the storm, their missions aborted but their crews safe. The drones were on their way to Kestrel. The immediate danger had passed. As the final confirmation of Raptor 7's safe landing came through, a collective sigh of relief went through the JOC. The tension finally broke, replaced by the low hum of after-action procedures. Vance watched the final lines of code scroll across her screen, confirming all systems were now stable. She closed the command line interface, and the screen reverted to the standard, user-friendly display. Her work was done. She rose from the chair, her movements showing the first signs of fatigue. Colonel Madsen was gone. He had slipped out sometime during the recovery, vanishing without a word. In his absence, the JOC felt calmer, more professional. Vance walked toward the exit. As she passed Master Sergeant Reyes, he gave her a short, sharp nod. It was a gesture of profound respect, an acknowledgement that went far beyond rank. She spent the rest of the night not in the officers' quarters, but in the cold, cavernous space of the logistics hub. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky washed clean and studded with brilliant, cold stars. The air was sharp with the smell of wet dust. The fluorescent lights hummed their tired tune, but the hub was quiet. The frantic energy of the day bled away. Vance stood before HAL 5, the robotic loader that had been the first domino to fall. A full diagnostic toolkit was open on the floor beside her. She had a panel open on the machine's main joint, exposing a complex web of hydraulic lines and microservos. She wasn't writing a report. She wasn't recommending a court-martial for Madsen or filing a complaint. Such things were consequences, byproducts of the failure. She was focused on the cause. With a delicate, practiced touch, she attached a calibration tool to the primary diagnostic sensor, the one that had been feeding the system a constant stream of lies. Her datapad displayed the sensor's output, a perfect, steady, green line. She gently tapped the sensor with the handle of a screwdriver. The line wavered, then returned to its placid green state. It was broken, not in a way that produced an error, but in a way that produced a fiction. It was designed to fail well, to fail green. A figure appeared at her side, casting a long shadow in the dim light. It was Master Sergeant Reyes. He held 2 steaming ceramic mugs. He offered one to her without a word. Vance took it, her fingers wrapping around the warmth. The coffee was black and strong. "The real maintenance," Reyes said, his voice a low rumble. He gestured with his mug toward the sensor she was working on. "It always is," she replied, her gaze not leaving her work. She took a sip of the coffee, then set it down carefully. She picked up a small wrench. "The reports don't fix the machine." Reyes stood with her in comfortable silence for a long time, watching her work. He was watching integrity in its purest form. The quiet, thankless, unseen labor of making things right, not for praise or promotion, but because the standard demanded it. As the first hint of dawn began to soften the eastern horizon, casting a pale, gray light through the high windows of the hub, Vance tightened the final bolt and closed the access panel. She ran a new diagnostic. On her datapad, a complex wave of authentic, fluctuating data appeared, a true and honest representation of the machine's health. It wasn't a perfect, flat green line. It was real. She packed her tools slowly, each one clicking softly into its designated slot. Her job at Erebus was done. She would leave as quietly as she had arrived, a ghost of competence passing through. The system was better, stronger, and more honest than it had been when she arrived. The people, at least some of them, were too. For a chief warrant officer, there was no greater victory. She picked up her mug and walked toward the growing light, leaving the hub and its now truthful machines behind in the quiet dawn.